Maria Alvarez froze mid-swipe, her rag hovering above the polished oak conference table, when Ethan Caldwell's voice cut through the glass walls of the Nexus Innovations boardroom, sharp and commanding. $35,000. My daily salary. Anyone who can translate this 40-page Mandarin merger proposal by Monday morning gets it. The room fell silent instantly, tension thick in the air as executives exchanged wary glances, but Maria stood motionless, her breath trapped, her heart pounding against her ribs. $35,000, one weekend's work, a chance to save her home, her mother, her entire life, but one wrong move could destroy everything she had fought to protect. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit like, because what happens next will leave you stunned. Maria Alvarez, 25 years old, worked as a cleaner on the 39th floor of Nexus Innovations, one of Seattle's most powerful tech empires, where billion-dollar deals were whispered in hushed tones behind glass walls while she scrubbed fingerprints from tables no one remembered touching. To them, Maria was invisible, a uniform and a mop, a part of the quiet machinery that kept their world gleaming. What they didn't know was that Maria spoke 3 languages fluently, English, Spanish, and Mandarin, and she could read and translate complex technical documents with precision, skills inherited from her parents but hidden like a buried treasure. Her father, Javier Alvarez, once one of Nexus's most brilliant strategists, had built the company's Asian markets from the ground up, signing partnerships worth hundreds of millions, but years ago he was blacklisted, accused of misconduct he never committed, his name destroyed by whispers Rachel Thornton herself helped orchestrate. Humiliated, Javier died of lung cancer before clearing his name, and Maria had carried the weight of his silence ever since, along with his jade pen engraved with the words, "Knowledge lights the way," a reminder of everything they lost. Her mother, Li Mei, a former software engineer from Shanghai, now lay bedridden, battling multiple sclerosis while Maria juggled 2 jobs, mounting hospital bills, and eviction notices pinned to the fridge of their 1-bedroom apartment. Li Mei's expired visa made everything worse. One wrong move, one question too many, and they could lose everything, not just their home, but their right to stay in the country. And now Ethan Caldwell, billionaire CEO of Nexus, was dangling salvation in front of her while holding the very knife that could cut her down. Ethan, tall and commanding in his navy suit, leaned against the sleek conference table, his Rolex catching the light as he held up the Mandarin proposal like a challenge. "The ZhaoTech deal is worth $100 million, he said evenly. "If we don't close by Monday, we lose the Tacoma plant, we lose leverage, we lose millions. Let's see who here earns their title." A low murmur ran through the room until Rachel Thornton, Nexus's CFO, spoke, her voice smooth and edged with mockery. "Good luck finding someone who can translate that on time," she said, her crimson nails tapping the table in perfect rhythm. Then, with deliberate cruelty, she let her gaze slide toward Maria, who was quietly wiping down the far corner of the room. "Unless, of course, we let the janitor try." A ripple of restrained laughter moved through the room, quiet but sharp, designed to sting without drawing blood, and Maria lowered her head, her cheeks burning, pretending she hadn't heard while every word etched itself into her memory. Mark Ellison, VP of Strategy, chuckled under his breath and leaned toward Rachel, whispering something she couldn't catch, but the mocking glances from across the table said enough. Maria slipped out of the boardroom as fast as she could, rag still clutched in her hand, her pulse racing with humiliation and something else she couldn't name, anger mixed with resolve. Downstairs, in the cramped janitorial closet lined with shelves of bleach and buckets, Maria sat on an overturned crate, staring at the floor as the weight of her reality pressed down harder than ever. She could do this. She could translate the entire document perfectly in less than 2 days. She could save the deal, claim the reward, pay off the hospital bills, and keep their home. But if she stepped into that spotlight, Rachel would tear her apart, dig into her family's secrets, expose Li Mei's visa, and crush her just like she crushed Javier. "You okay?" a voice asked softly from the doorway. Maria looked up to see Jamal Carter leaning against the frame, his security badge swinging as he folded his arms. At 30, Jamal was one of the few people in the building who treated her like she existed. I heard what Rachel said, he continued gently. Don't let it get to you. She's scared. People like her always are. Maria gave a soft, humorless laugh. Scared of me? I'm just the janitor. Jamal crouched to her level, his gaze steady. You're not just anything, he said firmly. I've seen the Mandarin notes you leave on mislabeled equipment when maintenance screws up. You think nobody notices, but I do. And sooner or later, the right person will too. His words sank deep, unsettling and comforting all at once. You should take the chance, Jamal added quietly. Go for the translation. Do it for your mom. Maria shook her head instantly. If I fail, Rachel will fire me. If I succeed, she'll still fire me, and maybe worse. Jamal leaned back, resting against the doorframe. Then don't let them know it's you, he said simply. Stay invisible. They already think you're nobody, that's your weapon. Use it. That night, long after her shift ended, Maria returned to the 39th floor. The hallways were quiet, the city lights reflecting across the glass walls like fractured stars, and her footsteps echoed softly against the marble. She slipped into the empty boardroom, heart pounding, and approached the thick ZhaoTech proposal resting on the table. The technical Mandarin unfolded effortlessly in her mind, every layered meaning revealing itself as though the words had been waiting for her all along. She noticed a mistranslated key term, Xingyun flux, an advanced thermal system critical to the merger, and corrected it neatly on the whiteboard, her handwriting precise and steady. At the bottom, she signed only 2 words, Shadow Scribe. The next morning, when the executives filed into the boardroom, Ethan stopped mid-sentence as his eyes landed on the correction. Whoever fixed this, he said, almost to himself, just saved us millions. Rachel's smile faltered, her sharp eyes scanning the whiteboard. Who was in here last night? She demanded, her voice icy. No one answered. Down the hall, Maria pushed her mop bucket forward, head lowered, lips curved in the faintest, secret smile. For now, she was still invisible. But not for long. Maria Alvarez stood in the supply closet, her back pressed against the cool metal shelves as she replayed Ethan Caldwell's words in her head, $35,000, 1 weekend, 1 chance. She had spent the entire night correcting a single mistranslation, leaving her signature as Shadow Scribe, and now, as she wheeled her mop down the hallway, she overheard the executives buzzing about the mysterious corrections on the boardroom whiteboard. Ethan Caldwell, normally composed and calculating, had actually paused mid-sentence when he saw the neatly written Mandarin characters. Whoever fixed this, he'd murmured, his tone both surprised and impressed, just saved us millions. Rachel Thornton, the CFO, had frozen, her crimson nails tapping against the edge of the table like distant gunfire. Who was in here last night? She demanded, her voice sharp and cold enough to slice glass. No one answered. Mark Ellison, the ambitious VP of strategy, leaned back in his chair, smirking like a predator who thought he'd already found his prey. Probably someone guessing, he said casually, but his narrowed eyes swept the room, calculating possibilities. Maria kept walking, her bucket wheels squeaking faintly against the marble, keeping her head down and her expression neutral. She couldn't afford to show a single hint of pride or fear. Her anonymity was her only protection. That evening, after her shift ended, Maria visited her mother, May, at the hospital. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air, the steady beeping of monitors forming a fragile rhythm beside her mother's bed. May's hands, once strong and quick on a keyboard, trembled as she reached for Maria's fingers. You look tired, May whispered softly in Mandarin, her voice thin but warm. Maria smiled faintly, hiding the exhaustion beneath her eyes. I'm fine, Mama, she said gently. I'm just thinking about something. She didn't mention the ZhaoTech proposal. She didn't tell her about the $35,000 reward or the eviction notice or the quiet storm brewing inside Nexus Innovations. May already carried too much. The weight of an expired visa, medical bills stacked on the counter, and memories of Javier's downfall haunted her more than she ever admitted. Maria kissed her mother's forehead and promised herself something she couldn't say out loud: she wouldn't let Li Mei lose anything more, not her home, not her dignity, not her peace. Back at Nexus the next morning, whispers about the mysterious shadow scribe spread through the upper floors. Ethan Caldwell held an impromptu strategy session with Rachel and Mark, demanding faster progress on the ZhaoTech deal. Mark, eager to impress, presented an initial translation draft, riddled with errors Maria could spot even from a distance as she quietly dusted the bookshelves nearby. The Xingyun flux system is being described here as a thermal regulator, Mark explained confidently, but that aligns perfectly with their manufacturing model. Maria bit the inside of her cheek to keep from reacting. He was wrong. Completely wrong. A mistranslation like that could cost Nexus millions in intellectual property disputes later. Rachel nodded, seemingly buying Mark's explanation, but Ethan frowned slightly, tapping his pen against the table. Then find the person who fixed the whiteboard, he said curtly. Whoever they are, they know something you don't. Later that afternoon, Maria slipped into the boardroom during lunch break, scanning the ZhaoTech document laid out on the table. She corrected another section, quietly, precisely, leaving subtle annotations in Mandarin that only a skilled linguist would notice. Again, she signed it Shadow Scribe. When the executives returned, Mark claimed credit for the changes. Ethan raised an eyebrow but said nothing, filing the information away. Rachel, however, wasn't convinced. Her sharp instincts told her someone else was behind these flawless corrections, and she hated not knowing who. That evening, Maria found herself cornered near the elevator by Jamal Carter, the security guard who had become her unexpected confidant. "You're playing with fire," he warned softly, leaning against the wall as other employees passed by, oblivious. "Mark's already bragging about your work, and Rachel's on high alert. You need to be careful." Maria crossed her arms, her voice low. "I don't have a choice, Jamal. That money could save my mother, save our apartment. I can't walk away." Jamal studied her face, the determination burning there, and sighed. "Then at least don't leave a trail. Use the empty supply closet on floor 41. No cameras there." For the next 2 nights, Maria worked in secret. She used the deserted closet as her sanctuary, translating entire sections of the ZhaoTech proposal by hand, jotting Mandarin characters on scrap paper, napkins, anything she could find. Each correction she left behind made Nexus look sharper, smarter, and better prepared for the deal, and each one tightened the noose around her anonymity. Meanwhile, Rachel grew restless, quietly instructing IT to flag any unusual access to digital documents. Mark, desperate to secure credit for the merger's success, began staying late at the office, lurking near the boardroom, waiting to catch the mysterious translator in the act. Then, disaster struck. On Friday afternoon, Rachel called an emergency meeting. She slammed a printed page onto the table, her red lipstick curved into a cold smile. "I found something," she announced. "A page in the ZhaoTech proposal has been altered without authorization." Ethan's brows furrowed. "Altered by who?" Rachel's gaze swept the room deliberately. "We're investigating," she said smoothly, "but if anyone here thinks they can play games with $100 million deal, they're mistaken." Maria's stomach dropped as she realized what Rachel had done. This wasn't her work. Rachel had planted a fake page, deliberately setting a trap to flush her out. That night, Maria sat in the darkened closet on floor 41, her hands trembling as she translated faster than ever before. Every tick of the clock echoed like thunder in her ears. She thought of Li Mei lying in the hospital, thought of Javier's jade pen tucked in her pocket, thought of the eviction notice taped to the fridge. She couldn't stop now, not when she was this close. Jamal checked on her around midnight, bringing her a cup of coffee and a tired smile. "You've got this," he said quietly. "But, Maria, if Rachel catches you, she'll bury you." Maria met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her ribs. Then I won't let her. By Saturday evening, exhaustion weighed on her like chains, but she had finished almost half the document. She found critical discrepancies no one else had noticed, clauses buried deep in the Mandarin text that allowed ZhaoTech to lay off nearly 400 Nexus employees if profits dipped in the first 2 years. Among those 400 were members of Jamal's family, people who depended on these jobs to survive. Her throat tightened as she stared at the clause, fury simmering beneath her exhaustion. Nexus's executives hadn't seen it because they hadn't bothered to look closely enough, but she had. And now she knew the stakes weren't just personal. They were collective. Maria debated her next move as the clock pushed past 2 a.m. If she revealed the layoff clause, she'd be exposing Nexus's incompetence, but doing so could also expose her identity, her mother's visa status, and everything she had tried to keep hidden. Jamal's words echoed in her ears, "Stay invisible. That's your weapon." But invisibility was becoming harder to maintain when her work was saving the company millions and threatening the jobs of hundreds of families. By Sunday morning, Nexus Innovations buzzed with tension. Ethan Caldwell grew impatient, Rachel grew suspicious, and Mark grew bolder, positioning himself as the savior of the ZhaoTech merger. As Maria wheeled her mop past the executive wing, she overheard Mark bragging to a junior analyst, "By Monday, Caldwell's going to see I'm the only one who can close this deal. I'll be VP of Global Strategy by summer." Maria clenched the mop handle until her knuckles whitened, forcing herself to keep walking, pretending she hadn't heard a word. But deep inside, something shifted. Mark was stealing credit for her work. Rachel was setting traps. Ethan was dangling a fortune in front of her while overlooking the very person holding the answers he needed. And Maria? Maria was done hiding. For now, though, she stayed silent, preparing her next move. Monday's deadline loomed like a storm on the horizon, and Maria Alvarez, the janitor they never noticed, was about to become the one name no one at Nexus could ignore. By Monday morning, tension gripped Nexus Innovations like a vice. Maria Alvarez pushed her janitorial cart down the 39th floor hallway, her expression calm, but her chest pounded with each step. She had spent the entire weekend working in secret, translating the ZhaoTech proposal line by line, leaving flawless annotations signed only as shadow scribe. Her precise corrections had already saved the company millions, but her invisibility was fragile. Mark Ellison, the ambitious VP of Strategy, was stealing credit for her work, and Rachel Thornton, Nexus's calculating CFO, was hunting the real author. One mistake, and Maria would lose not only her job but possibly her mother's fragile safety too. In the morning boardroom meeting, CEO Ethan Caldwell set the tone, his voice cold and sharp. "We have 48 hours to finalize the ZhaoTech deal," he said. "If this document isn't airtight, we lose the Tacoma plant and hundreds of millions." Mark leaned back confidently, his smile smug. "Don't worry, Ethan. I've been fixing the inconsistencies myself." Maria, wiping down shelves nearby, gripped her rag tighter. Every correction Mark bragged about was hers. Ethan gave him a nod but didn't look convinced. Rachel leaned forward, her crimson nails tapping against the glass table. "Interesting," she said coolly, eyes narrowing on Mark. "Since when are you fluent in Mandarin?" Mark hesitated, then recovered with a practiced smirk. "Talent adapts," he replied smoothly. Rachel didn't argue, but her sharp gaze told Maria she wasn't buying it. Later that day, Maria nearly jumped when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Rachel standing there, perfectly composed, her sharp eyes studying her like an open book. "Maria, isn't it?" Rachel asked softly, her tone too smooth to be casual. "We've had some unauthorized edits on the ZhaoTech document. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Maria forced her voice steady. "No, ma'am. I just clean the rooms." Rachel's smile was thin, almost amused, but her voice carried an edge. "If you see anything unusual, you'll tell me, won't you? Maria nodded quickly, holding her breath until Rachel walked away. That night, Maria sat hunched in the small supply closet on floor 41, the only place without cameras. Pages of Mandarin characters covered the desk, her notes written on scraps of paper, napkins, anything she could find. Jamal Carter, the security guard and her only ally, appeared at the door holding 2 cups of coffee. "She's getting close, Maria," he warned quietly. "Rachel knows someone's behind this, and she's watching everyone." Maria sipped the coffee with shaking hands, exhaustion pulling at her bones, but her voice stayed firm. "I have to finish," she said. "If I don't, Nexus signs a deal that destroys 400 jobs, including your cousin's. If I do, Rachel will come after me." Jamal leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Then stay invisible. Let her underestimate you. That's your weapon." By midnight, Maria was buried in her father's old research notes, lent to her by Jamal after he found them in Nexus's archives. Javier Alvarez had once been the company's brightest strategist, and his careful handwriting unlocked technical phrases Maria had struggled to translate. With his help, she discovered something no one else had seen, a buried clause in ZhaoTech's contract allowing mass layoffs if profits dipped within 2 years. 400 workers, families like Jamal's, were at risk. Maria's throat tightened as she realized the stakes weren't just personal anymore. The next morning, Rachel played her first card. In a tense meeting, she slid a printed page onto the table. "We've discovered unauthorized edits," she announced coldly. "If ZhaoTech sees this, the deal could collapse." Ethan frowned, scanning the document. "Who changed it?" Rachel crossed her arms. "We're investigating, but I intend to find out before tomorrow." Maria's stomach dropped as she realized what Rachel had done. The page was fake, planted to bait the real translator into exposing themselves. That afternoon, Mark grew bolder. Maria spotted him lurking near the boardroom during lunch, watching the ZhaoTech documents like a hawk. As she wheeled her cart past, she overheard him bragging to a junior analyst, "Once Caldwell sees the quality of my translation, I'll land VP of Global Strategy. By summer, I'll be untouchable." Maria clenched her jaw, forcing herself to keep walking, pretending she hadn't heard. That night, she returned to the supply closet, exhaustion weighing her down, but determination pushing her forward. She translated faster, more precisely, racing against both time and Rachel's trap. Around 2 a.m., footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the closet. Maria killed the light instantly, heart pounding in her throat. A shadow paused by the door, Mark. He leaned closer, listening, then moved on. Maria waited until silence returned, then turned the lamp back on and kept working, gripping her father's jade pen for courage. By Tuesday morning, the ZhaoTech proposal was nearly complete. Every clause, every subclause, every technical reference had been translated flawlessly. But Maria wasn't done yet. Buried deep in the final section, she discovered another hidden danger, a concealed provision granting ZhaoTech unilateral control of Nexus's patents after the merger. If signed, Nexus would lose billions in intellectual property rights. Ethan didn't know. Mark didn't know. Rachel definitely didn't know. Only Maria did, and now the weight of that knowledge pressed harder than ever. That evening, Jamal found her sitting on the floor of the supply closet, her head resting against the wall. "You look dead on your feet," he said softly, handing her a fresh cup of coffee. "I can't stop," she whispered. "If I finish this, I save the company, save your family, save my mom. But if Rachel figures out it's me," her voice trailed off. Jamal crouched beside her, his voice steady and calm. "Then make Ethan see your work first," he said firmly. "Let him know who you are before Rachel spins her lies. He respects results. Use that." Maria stared at the final pages spread across the desk, her exhaustion giving way to quiet resolve. "Then I finish tonight," she said, her voice steady now. Every word, every line. As the city lights glittered across the glass walls of Nexus Innovations, Maria translated the final paragraphs, her father's notes guiding her hand like whispers from the past. Each annotation she made carried the weight of her family's survival, her mother's safety, and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. When she signed the last correction, her trembling hand carved the same 2 words across the page, Shadow Scribe. But down the hall, Mark watched from the shadows, his phone raised, recording everything. His smirk widened. He thought he had her. What he didn't know was that Maria Alvarez was no longer hiding, and soon, everyone at Nexus would know her name. By Wednesday morning, Nexus Innovations pulsed with tension so thick it felt alive. Maria Alvarez pushed her janitorial cart down the hallway as if it were any other day, but inside, her chest burned with adrenaline. 48 sleepless hours had passed. The ZhaoTech proposal, the key to a $100 million merger, was finally complete, every line flawlessly translated, every hidden trap exposed. Yet instead of relief, Maria felt the storm closing in. Mark Ellison had stolen her work and claimed it as his own. Rachel Thornton had planted fake evidence to frame her for sabotage. And Ethan Caldwell, the CEO who held her future in his hands, still didn't know she existed. If she stayed silent, 400 employees could lose their jobs, including Jamal's cousins. If she spoke, Rachel would use her mother's expired visa as a weapon. Either choice carried ruin, but the clock had run out. That morning, Ethan called an emergency board meeting. The conference room was already buzzing when Maria slipped quietly inside to refill the water pitchers, her uniform and mop making her invisible as usual. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his tailored navy suit perfectly crisp, his tone cold and clipped. ZhaoTech wants final confirmation today, he said sharply. If this deal isn't airtight, we walk away and lose Tacoma. I want every detail verified. Mark leaned forward confidently, his expensive watch glinting under the lights. Don't worry, Ethan, he said smoothly. I've triple-checked every clause. We're solid. Rachel, seated across from him, crossed her legs and smiled faintly, her crimson nails drumming against the glass tabletop. That's interesting, she said lightly. Because yesterday I discovered unauthorized edits buried in the proposal. She slid a page across the table dramatically, her gaze sharp as glass. If ZhaoTech sees this, the entire deal collapses. Gasps murmured through the room. Ethan's brows furrowed as he scanned the page, his jaw tightening. Who altered this? Rachel leaned back, her voice soft but cutting. We don't know yet. But I have my suspicions. Her gaze drifted toward Maria, who froze by the door, clutching the water pitcher so tightly her knuckles whitened. Before Maria could retreat, Ethan turned toward her. Maria, isn't it? He asked calmly, his voice carrying authority that silenced the entire room. Every executive turned to look at her, the janitor no one ever noticed, now trapped in their spotlight. Maria's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. Yes, sir. Ethan's sharp gaze pinned her in place. You've been here late nights cleaning the boardroom, he said slowly. Have you seen anyone working on these documents after hours? Maria hesitated, feeling Rachel's icy stare burning into her side, then shook her head. No, sir. Rachel smiled faintly, triumphant, certain she'd cornered her prey. That was when Jamal appeared in the doorway, carrying a small, unmarked flash drive. He caught Maria's eye, giving her the tiniest nod, and she understood instantly, this was it. This was her chance to end the game. Maria stepped forward, placing the pitcher on the table with shaking hands, and turned to Ethan. Sir, she said softly but firmly, if I may, there's something you need to see. Rachel's head snapped up, her smile vanishing. Mr. Caldwell, she said sharply, I strongly advise against wasting time on baseless accusations from. Ethan held up his hand, silencing her, his piercing gaze fixed on Maria. Go ahead, he said. Maria pulled the flash drive from Jamal's hand and connected it to the large display at the front of the room. The screen flickered to life, revealing side-by-side comparisons of the ZhaoTech proposal, the original Mandarin document, Javier Alvarez's archived notes, and Maria's precise translations. She spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This proposal contains multiple errors," she explained. The Xingyun flux system was mistranslated as a thermal regulator. That would have cost Nexus millions in penalties. Mark shifted uncomfortably, but she continued without looking at him. "There's also a subclause on page 37 granting ZhaoTech unilateral control of Nexus's patents. If signed as written, we'd lose billions in intellectual property." She flipped through more examples, exposing Mark's false claims and Rachel's planted evidence with meticulous precision. Gasps echoed around the room. Ethan leaned forward, his sharp jaw tightening as his eyes scanned Maria's flawless translations. "Who are you?" he asked finally, his voice lower now, more measured. Maria hesitated, then took a deep breath. "My name is Maria Alvarez," she said quietly. "I've been working here 3 years as part of the janitorial staff. My father, Javier Alvarez, helped build Nexus's Asian markets before he was blacklisted under false accusations. I inherited his research, and I've been using it to ensure this deal doesn't destroy the company, or its employees." For a long, tense moment, silence filled the room. Then Rachel erupted. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice rising, losing its usual control. "You expect us to believe a janitor just happens to be an expert translator? This is espionage, Ethan." "She accessed classified documents without authorization," Maria interrupted, her tone calm but firm. "I never accessed anything unauthorized. Every correction I made came from documents left on open tables, visible whiteboards, or publicly available archives." "The fake edits you've discovered, Ms. Thornton?" Maria clicked to another slide, revealing metadata logs Jamal had retrieved. "They were created on your account, using your credentials, at 11:42 p.m. last Friday." The room erupted. Executives whispered furiously as Rachel froze, her face paling for the first time. Ethan turned slowly to her, his voice cold as steel. "Rachel. Is that true?" Rachel stammered, searching for words, but Mark jumped in, desperate to salvage his reputation. "Ethan, she's lying," he said quickly. "She's framing Rachel to cover herself." "Look, I've been working day and night," Maria cut him off sharply, her voice steady and strong now. "Then explain why your version of the translation includes mistakes I corrected days earlier." She clicked again, revealing time-stamped revisions. "Every edit you claimed credit for was mine, and you know it." Mark's confident facade cracked instantly, his face reddening as Ethan's gaze hardened. The CEO stood, his presence towering over the table. "Enough," he said sharply. "I want both of you out of my boardroom. Now." Security arrived within seconds, and for the first time, Rachel and Mark looked small, their power stripped away as they were escorted out. Ethan turned back to Maria, studying her with a mix of curiosity and respect. "You saved this deal," he said simply. "You've done more for Nexus in 3 days than most people in this room have done in 3 years." Maria lowered her gaze, her voice quiet but steady. "I didn't do it for Nexus," she said softly. "I did it for the people this deal affects. 400 employees would have lost their jobs if I stayed silent." Ethan paused, then nodded once. "You're not staying silent anymore." He reached across the table, sliding the finalized contract toward her. "Finish the translation. On record this time. When ZhaoTech signs, you'll get the $35,000 I promised." Maria exhaled shakily, gripping her father's jade pen in her pocket. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a janitor, not as a shadow, but as someone who mattered. Outside the boardroom, Jamal waited, leaning against the wall with his arms folded and a proud grin on his face. You just shook the entire company, he said quietly. Maria smiled faintly, exhaustion softening her expression. Not yet, she murmured. But soon. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. In less than 24 hours, ZhaoTech's CEO Wei Zhao would demand to meet the mysterious shadow scribe in person, and Maria's quiet life would never be the same again. At 8:58 a.m., Maria Alvarez hit send, delivering the finalized ZhaoTech translation seconds before the deadline. The entire boardroom held its breath until ZhaoTech's CEO, Wei Zhao, confirmed the deal on a live video call, praising Nexus's flawless execution and requesting one unusual condition, that Maria, the mysterious shadow scribe, be officially appointed as liaison for the first year. Ethan Caldwell didn't hesitate. He agreed immediately and publicly credited Maria as the lead translator whose precision had saved the company millions. Rachel Thornton and Mark Ellison, exposed for planting fake edits and stealing Maria's work, were escorted out by security within the hour. With their departure, a weight lifted from the building, whispers of resentment turned into quiet nods of respect as Maria walked past hallways where no one had ever looked at her twice before. The next morning, Maria received 2 life-changing deposits, Ethan's promised $35,000 reward and a $60,000 bonus from ZhaoTech for uncovering hidden contract traps. She went straight to the hospital, paying the $6,000 deposit for Li Mei's treatment in full, and met with an immigration attorney retained by Nexus to resolve her mother's visa status. For the first time in years, Maria saw Li Mei relax, her shoulders easing as if a lifetime of fear had loosened its grip. When Maria returned to work, she no longer wore her janitorial badge. Ethan had personally appointed her director of global strategy for the ZhaoTech partnership. With her new role, Maria launched the Hidden Talents program, inspired by Jamal and countless others whose skills were overlooked. The initiative invited employees across Nexus to anonymously submit their certifications, languages, and hidden abilities, pairing them with short, paid assignments to prove their expertise. Within 6 months, 35 employees transitioned into better-fitting roles, attrition dropped significantly, and productivity soared. Jamal was promoted to reliability analyst, finally using his mechanical engineering degree after years stuck in security. Priya Patel, whose stolen algorithm had once been buried under Rachel's name, now led a small innovation team, mentoring junior analysts who had been overlooked like she once was. Beyond programs and titles, Maria transformed the culture at Nexus. She introduced blind reviews for promotions, ensured contributions were credited by name, and created direct, floor-to-boardroom, feedback sessions where executives heard from employees actually doing the work. The Tacoma plant, once facing mass layoffs, became a thriving symbol of collaboration. A photo of 3 shift leads, one from Spokane, one from Lagos, and one from Shanghai, standing arm in arm beneath a banner reading "Integration Complete," went viral internally. Maria pinned it above her desk as a reminder of why she fought so hard. At home, life was healing in quieter ways. Li Mei's health stabilized, and she began consulting part-time for a nonprofit designing accessible tools for MS patients. Their small apartment felt lighter, filled with conversations instead of unpaid bills and eviction fears. Sometimes, on peaceful mornings, Li Mei would sit by the window and translate poems between Mandarin and English, her voice soft, her smile returning piece by piece. 6 months after the merger, Nexus's market share had risen by 45%, but for Maria, the true victory was personal. No longer invisible, she had built bridges where walls once stood, between executives and employees, between cultures, and between past wounds and future possibilities. On her walnut desk sat Javier's jade pen, engraved with the words that had carried her through every sleepless night: "Knowledge lights the way." Maria smiled at it quietly, knowing this was not the end of her story but the foundation for what came next, the proof that when unseen people are finally given a voice, they don't just change their lives. They change everything. If Maria's story inspired you, please subscribe and like the video. Thank you for watching and supporting us, it means the world.